Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough, and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
You know, today our guest is Trey Brooks, and Trey has a very interesting ministry that allows him the opportunity to travel full time with his family. You'll learn a little more about that. But as I began to examine that lifestyle, you know, have always been kind of had an infatuation with road and life on the road. Even in my younger years, I did a little bit of hitchhiking and traveling about the country just for travel's sake. But now that I'm a little more seasoned in life, you know, me and my wife actually talk about, hey, could we actually go and live on the road? Would that be fun? Like either in a van or an RV or something. And I think if we did it, it would have to be like in an RV. I'm to the point now, I don't know if I could do that van life like I did in my early 20s. I was at a VW bus, you know, those little mini buses, you know, back in my hippie days. But now I would have to be in an RV of some sorts, I believe. What about you guys? Could you do the road life? If so, would you need to be in a hotel, or could you do it in an RV?
I could do an RV, but it better be bougie. I mean, nice, new, beautiful, shiny.
So you want to be glamping?
I want to be glamping. I don't want to be roughing it. I don't want to be in an Airstream. I want to be in a nice, bougie RV with nice things.
Man, you know, I think I could. I've been exposed to this a little bit through my dad and my stepmom, who are part of a ministry called Campers on Mission. And they pretty much live out of their fifth wheel, probably 8 to 9 months out of the year. And they go around building churches for free. All the church has to do is provide these materials. Well, I've taken off time and I've gone and stayed with them in their fifth wheel for a week and just worked on the job site. And there's a cool community inside, you know, the parks and among the campers. I think that part would appeal to me, being among the trees and nature does, but I'm not sure I can be gone from the niceties, you know, having access to my library or having access to my own refrigerator that's a full-size refrigerator. Man, I'm not sure. I mean, I think I would enjoy it for a few weeks, but man, something about coming home. I don't know if I could do what Trey does. That's a good question, Josh. I'm baffled by that.
Well, I'm a little nervous. I go to sleep at night fairly early, and I wake up in the next morning and I look at we have YouTube on the TV, and my wife is consistently looking at tiny home living or van life or even hiking the Appalachian Trail. And I think she's convinced that when we're empty nesters, at some point we're going to spend 6 months, not in an RV or in a camper or a van or a hotel, but actually in a tent on the Appalachian Trail somewhere.
Now, there's a real question for our listeners. Could you live in a tiny home with your spouse? Don't answer that out loud. You might get in trouble. But I don't think my wife and we love the idea of the tiny home, but we know practically we need space. We need individual space in there. Speaking of YouTube, Josh, let me remind our listeners of an absolutely free service that we have that we'd love for them to be a part of. It's called Top Reads for Busy Leaders. Top Reads for Busy Leaders. And every Thursday morning at 6:30 a.m., we will send to your inbox, to your email, 12 articles that you should at least be aware of. We're not saying we endorse all these articles. They're typically newsworthy, something about culture, something about leadership or parenthood or grandparenting. It can take on a whole variety of types of titles and so forth. But we send that out, and many of the pastors use this to last minute preparation for sermon. They'll work in a stat, they'll work in a story, or they'll just be familiar. And if you want to sign up for that, you can go to our website, and there's a link there that you can easily find and be a part of that service. And just be aware. Now, having said that in a commercial sense, being aware of all that's out there, I think that's what Trey does as a ministry consultant. He is in tune and in touch, and there are, I don't know, I've been in rooms where he has been leading, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who take their cues from Trey in the area of children's ministry, and he's really good at it, he and his wife. And so when we come back from this break, he's going to just give us some insight that we're going to have some things we're going to take off the Trey shelf and put into practice in everyday life when we get back from this break.
Are you concerned about your church's future? Will it serve another generation? The Bible says He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and yet we often only know how to connect to Abraham. Let D6 help you connect with each generation. Your kids and grandkids are counting on you. D6 comes from the principles of Deuteronomy 6 and helps what happens in church also happen at home. Curriculum you can trust. Discipleship that connects.
We are joined today by Mr. Trey Brooks, who is the co-director of Equip to Engage, and he travels full-time in ministry with his family to equip, encourage, and connect children's leaders. He's a graduate of Southern Nazarene University and Nazarene Theological Seminary. He's an ordained elder and is a Strengths Finder advocate. Trey is married to Candace, and they have 3 children. Trey, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, it's a privilege.
I'm really looking forward to this. Tell us, what is Equip to Engage?
So Equip to Engage is really the lived out call on my wife and I's life. About 10 years ago, God began to impress on us the need for equipping children's leaders in our area. And so we began to explore, God, what does that mean for us? Mm-hmm. We hadn't been in ministry very long ourselves. And so questioning, God, are we the people to do this? Right? Yeah. And so we just kept following that. And we started an event for children's leaders in our denomination in our area. And it was cool to see what God did. God did amazing things that first year, and God kept growing it, and it kept involving more areas and more locations. And about 5 years ago, God said, I want you to do this full time. And we didn't really know what that meant, what this was, other than equipping children's leaders. Mm-hmm. We didn't have enough on our schedule to cover a family of 5.
Right.
And so we did it anyways. And after we began to take those steps, God began to show us what Equipped to Engage, what became Equipped to Engage. And now here we are.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy. And we believe Equipped to Engage is called to serve children's leaders through quality, affordable, local leadership development. And so that's why we travel full time. Yeah. Is we believe if we can get to people, people can get to us, and we can keep the costs where they can actually come.
That's awesome.
And so that's what we've been doing.
That's so great. Yeah. You know, God created us for connection and for relationships. It's something that you guys really focus on, is connection in your programs. Can you tell us, how does that work, and what are the benefits that come from those connections?
I think that often children's leaders feel alone, and they feel like they're in the basement. Some of them, that's where they do
Literally
ministry for real.
in the basement.
And they feel like they're the only person in that basement doing children's ministry, and they don't know where to get resources, and they don't have a whole lot of funding. And so we just believe when we can pull those people together, that they can be reminded that they are on a big team of people, that there are resources all around them that they can use, and that we can show them, and they can be reminded of that team.
Yeah.
That
Awesome.
we say all the time at our events, we are one team, gathered from all over the place, but called to serve God's children and their families.
That's awesome. So, do you have any success stories? I mean, with all of these that you've done throughout the years, what are some of those success stories that you can share from either a retreat or an event that you've done in the past?
So it's been really cool to see how when people come, often it's not uncommon, it doesn't happen every time, but people are called into vocational ministry. And we have one lady who came to that very first one who went into children's ministry, and God just called her into lead pastoring.
Wow.
And so she's a lead pastor in a local church. She's been there like 2 weeks. And so it's cool to see that.
That's so cool.
But also, I have a little quote I want to share with you. This is from a participant who came. And this is what they wrote. Thank you, thank you, thank you. When I got here, I was not sure I was going to stay a children's pastor. But God called me. God met me in a big way. I am refreshed, renewed, refocused, redirected, and ready to move forward with new insight, new vision, new goals, and lots of hugs from Jesus with skin on. Thank you for this weekend. Signed, a weary warrior who received rest and relaxation and is ready for battle. And you know, that's really what we hope. Before the pandemic, we were going out and all of our stuff was in person.
Yeah.
And that's what we hope. As we've had to change over the last year and we've gone virtual and people have had to Zoom in, that's really what we hope. That we hope that they come and they get renewal and they be reminded of what God has called them to do, whether they're a children's pastor or a lay leader. It doesn't matter.
And I'm sure comments like that are refreshing for you to say, we are clearly doing what God has called us to, and He is bringing people to us that need what we can offer to them. Am I right in saying that?
So it's so encouraging.
Yeah. Can you tell us, in your service and training with church leaders, I'm sure there are lots and lots of FAQs, right? Those frequently asked questions or maybe some topics. Let's talk about milestones for a bit, because I think as a children's leader, that's something that you really gravitate to. Also, as a parent, it seems like raising your children is just getting them from one milestone to the next milestone, and I'm sure that translates to families and family ministry as well. Can you speak to some of that?
Yeah, I love talking about milestones. A few years back, Brian Haynes wrote a book called Shift. And I read that book, and it really began to transform how I think about how we come alongside parents or primary faith influencers. And I think milestones are an excellent way for us to do that, whether that's in the church or in our own families. But really, when those two come together, and they come together in a beautiful way to celebrate that as a family and church.
How can we as parents celebrate those milestones? Can you give us some pointers, some tips? What are some ways that we can celebrate those milestones, whether it be within our family and our family dynamic, or the literal milestones that we are walking our kids through as we're discipling them?
I think milestones is a great word. When we began to explore this in our local church, there are lots of words that we can use for milestones, but in our own life, when we were doing this, our daughter was about 2, right? And when we would go to the doctor, they would talk about the milestones. And I think that wording is very easy for people to understand, whether they're church people or non-church people. And so partnering that church and family together for milestones. So some of the things that I think we can do as churches and families together is celebrating birth. How do we do that in a way? I think often when we do baby dedications or infant baptisms, depending on your tradition, we say, here's what we're going to do, but we don't ever say why. And a beautiful thing with that book that shaped me is said, let's gather these primary faith influencers, parents, together, and let's help them understand why we're doing this baby dedication or infant baptism. And then as they get a little older, right, they begin to read. How do we come alongside and help them understand the importance of God's Word at this natural transition in their life? Maybe they're going into elementary school. And then a little later, middle school. How do we come alongside and say, okay, now it's preteen, right? This is a different time of life. And so I think the partnering of the home and the church is how we can really elevate these milestones and encourage families to be about living out what it means to walk along the road, to go to lie down, to get up, all that's found in Deuteronomy chapter 6.
So what do you say to the church leaders who say, maybe that is for me? Maybe I need to attend one of their retreats or conferences. What benefit do you have as a church leader when you find a partnership with you all?
I think what that does is one, we come local. And so often more people can come, especially if you're at a smaller church with a smaller budget. More people can come. And so what that does is build team. So the benefit for a local church person or church leader is that opportunity to build team, to get away. We do retreats. And so in the retreating, one of the things we do is called Spark. And Spark is an equipping retreat. All of the equipping that you would find at a conference, but set in an atmosphere that is retreat feeling. I don't know if that explains it well.
A little more relaxed feel.
It's like this hybrid of a conference and a spiritual retreat where you come away equipped and encouraged to live out the call to serve children and families in your local church.
Awesome. Well, if you are looking for a resource like this, be sure to check out Equip to Engage and Trey Brooks, all that he offers. Thank you so much for what you're doing in the kingdom, but thank you also for joining me today. I keep hitting this microphone. Sorry about it. Thank you so much for joining us, Trey. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, that was so powerful. And Trey, I've never held the role of children's ministry leader. That's never been a role in the church that I've held. And what he did for me in his language today is he reminded me of sometimes how children's ministry leaders feel. He used language like they feel like they're alone in the basement. I don't know if you guys remember that part of his podcast, but they feel alone in the basement. And that just was so good for me to remember to check in on my children's ministry leaders and my children's ministry volunteers. It's hard work and it can feel like you're not making progress. You may be taking 2 steps forward with a child and then like 10 steps backward just in the area of discipleship and families. And it's just always changing. And there's such a range between preschool to preteen. And sometimes in the children's ministry world, you're overseeing all of that and all the developmental challenges. And so I just really value what Trey and his family feel called to do and just empower. And he used words like refreshment and renewal. And that truly is his heart. He wants to go into places and bring life, breathe life into ministry leaders, which I love that he does that.
I find it so comforting because having a children's ministry background, I know exactly what he feels. It feels like you're very isolated in the church sometimes because you are typically off in another area. They put the children's ministry a little farther away from most because it's usually the loudest and the rowdiest bunch in the building. But not just that in your own church, but isolated as when you enter into a vocation as children's ministry, because it is a very niche position and not many people understand the challenges that come with it. And you can feel a little isolated. And I love the fact that he is drawing people in specifically from those smaller churches. And the thing is, a lot of smaller churches don't have the budgets to be able to go to the big conferences. And one of those things that he has done is help to bring all of those people together, because it's kind of nice when you feel like a castaway, but you realize, wait a minute, there's a bunch of us out here, and I'm not
Yes.
alone. We actually, and this is a suggestion I have for our leaders, it is something that was very valuable to me very early on in children's ministry, is we had a group of us children's pastors and somebody that helped to launch a Nashville area kids ministry network, where we would just go to lunch once a month, and still do go to lunch once a month, and be able just to encourage, to bounce ideas off of each other, to really go like, hey, to be reminded, I'm not in this alone. I have other people, and it's very valuable.
I think in addition to making sure you network with other children's ministry leaders, whether you're a paid staff or a volunteer over children's ministry, you really need to get the people within your church who's over all the different age ministries together on a regular basis and brainstorm, pray for the people in your ministry, and create that chemistry and bond that you need inside your local church. That way, children's ministry is not that silo. You're not forgotten about. Because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking just what we were talking about. You're stressed because the parents are stressed. They're going through all these developmental periods. The children are testing your boundaries and their boundaries. But you know what? If you talk to the student pastor, the teen pastor, youth pastor, they have similar stresses. Get together, pray about these, figure out how we can help and encourage one another. And don't be, out there all alone feeling like, man, I'm drowning, or for that matter, don't even celebrate alone. Do this together within the teams, other children's ministry leaders, and your own internal team, whether voluntary or paid, there where you are. Next week, we have Ken Thomas that we're going to be interviewing from Connect Ministries. And he's just going to be this idea generator for outreach and ways to just naturally share the gospel. And it's a no-nonsense approach. And I think you're going to enjoy Ken Thomas. Until then, we're praying for you to have intentional, teachable moments connecting to all generations in your ministry.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.